Welcome to the Boss It Weekly podcast, a no-nonsense, no-hype, frank and close-up analysis of what is currently working and what is not in the world of software. The Boss It podcast is packed with major takeaways for software business owners and managers. So, let's begin.
Welcome to Boss It Podcast, and today my guest is David Hirschfield from a company called Techies. I've had a number of conversations with David over the last few weeks. Many topics that we could cover. Really interesting guy, and that's why I've invited him along to the podcast today. I want to find out a little bit about his background. Also, perhaps talk about some of his interests currently, and one of those is about personal branding, and I know that's a topic that we've sort of touched on in the past in some podcasts, but I know that it's a conversation that I've had with many of you. But I also want to talk about something that he's doing with Techies around no code, low code, a platform and a framework. I want to talk about the definition between the two, and just generally his experiences of being in the software industry from the late 80s, I think. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Is that right, late 80s that you came into the industry?
Yeah, late 80s, 87 when I officially entered this market.
So you've been around for some time. You'd have seen quite a change. Looking back, what are the biggest changes you've seen? What's really impacted you?
It's funny that you ask the question in that way, because as I'm launching off in a new venture right now, it's come full circle in some ways, because some things that were the primary direction technology-wise in terms of what the objectives were in the early 90s are now same kind of primary objections, just the technology is completely different to accomplish those things, in particular in the whole low-code, no-code, or model-driven development area. So, but what's the biggest that's changed? Devices, I think, is by far the biggest change.
Just to give you a heads up, David, your headset? I don't think you've got a headset on, because I can hear you're walking away from the mic and it's going a little bit quieter.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, okay, we could still hear you. But it's evident that you haven't got a headset on.
Oh, you know what? Let me check, because I am wearing a headset, but maybe it's using my computer microphone and I didn't realize it. So
there you go. So even when we're in the technology sector, we still have technology problems. In fact, I think quite often we probably get more. We know how to do this stuff, but it's overlooking it sometimes.
It's because it changes so fast.
Yes, it does.
Yesterday it was my headset, and today somehow it ended up being something else.
Yeah. Perhaps we're a bit more relaxed about it because we think we've got all of this stuff nailed. I know it always makes me smile is when you see people going in to do even a sort of a presentation, and I've been at a number of IT organizations, really big organizations, and they're struggling to get the presentation to show on the screen, and you end up with sort of like three of their top teams trying to get this done, especially when it's M&A discussions. There's quite a bit of pressure, and you've got senior board level members in the room, and they're saying, right, we just want to show you a short presentation, and it takes them 25 minutes to get it onto the screen.
and they're all sweating.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and they bring the first techie in, and he's sweating, and then he calls his boss, and then they call in his boss. It's been amusing, and that's happened a number of times, I can tell you. Anyway, so how are you doing?
Is this better?
That's much better. Yeah, that's okay. That's markedly different. Although the sound quality was pretty good before, so there's no problems. We'll just continue, and all the people we're talking to, they're all friends and technical people, so they know what it's like. Mm-hmm. So you were saying about some of the things that you were seeing in the 90s. You still see as issues now?
Well, they've come full circle. They went out of the idea of model-driven development was in vogue in the early 90s. With platforms that were meant to define business rules in models and business and data flow all through these visual models and then generate systems. Back then, mainframe systems, when it started, all COBOL driven.
Yes.
Then languages started to change really fast with C++, and then Microsoft Stack and open source code and all the different stacks that came along, and these model-driven platforms just were not. There was no understanding of how to create these in a world where you're going to have the technology infrastructure, both in hardware and software, shifting all the time. And so that went out of vogue. But now it's coming back again, because now the model-driven platforms are being built with the idea of IoT devices, microservices, and independent of the actual development stack. And so all of a sudden it's coming back again, because systems are just getting more and more complicated. The simpler they get, the more complicated they're getting. To be able to assemble, and it has a lot to do with what you were saying about how much things are changing and the speed of which things are changing.
Yes.
Because you can't just build it and deploy it and you're done. You build it and deploy it, and by the time you deploy it, depending on how long it took you to build it, it may already be out of date or obsolete.
Yes.
And so it has to change really fast.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think partly that also is down to the customers are probably more demanding. They're not prepared to wait months for something to be completed, or probably years as it was in the past. And because their industry is moving ever more quickly, as a software developer, if you're slow, you're allowing the opportunity for one of your competitors to step in. So you need to be able to do that, but with ever more complex solutions.
Exactly.
And it's one way of being able to address that. Unusually, I understand that you started off as a salesperson, but then you decided, I think this was right, you decided that you wanted to go to, as you described it, tech school. Is that right?
Well, yes. I started out in sales, selling IBM mainframe software in the late 70s. And I did that for 4 years with one company, and then went to work for Texas Instruments. But I was always frustrated because the sales engineers who I had to partner with, I'd have to schedule them in advance. Sometimes I would lose the immediateness of the opportunity as a result, and they weren't always able to articulate the business value along with the technical features of a product in a way that I felt was doing justice to the products that I was selling. Right. So I found myself continually learning the technology well enough that I could do these demonstrations and conversations on my own without needing to schedule sales engineers. And then when I went to work for Texas Instruments, it was in a similar situation, except I was in a remote area. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona at that time for Texas Instruments, working with government sector in the Southwest. And I'd have to schedule a week in advance. Well, that's when I was selling a model-driven development platform, and it was a big, complex product.
Yes.
And it was a big, complex sale. And in government, when you're selling to government, the way you sell is you get everybody across the various departments to buy into the idea. And then you build consensus, and everybody starts talking about the product as though it's a fait accompli, as some new project is coming up that they put out an RFP, and they write that product in the RFP as a requirement.
Yes.
And which is a long, torturous process.
Yes. What made you want to sell to government? Was there a part of you that you wanted to punish yourself?
Oh, I was going to say ignorance. Ignorance. Nobody wants to sell to government. Have you heard anybody that really wants?
No, I did.
The end result can be really good.
Yes.
Because government spends a lot. But
sure.
No, just didn't realize how long and involved every single sale would end up being. I was used to a 6-month sales cycle, but I wasn't used to a 2-year-long sales cycle, and that's what it ended up being.
Yeah.
And so the only way I could shortcut that was to basically be demoing the software to everybody that was interested, that would listen to me for 5 minutes, so I could show them how it worked. Directors of development, managers of development, people in QA that were a management role, with the idea that I'd make them hungry for something different and new that could make their world better. So I learned. So I convinced management to let me go to training. And at Texas Instruments, that was an act of God, virtually, because Texas Instruments is an engineering company historically.
Yes.
Salespeople in that company are a necessary evil, and I was part of the necessary evil crowd.
Yes.
So getting them to let me mingle with their with the engineers, they just didn't do it, but they did, because I just was relentless and pressed until they finally let me go to their class in Plano, Texas, to learn how to develop on the tool. And
so
then
that gave you some independence, and it gave you the ability to be able to get in and talk to your customer at a technical level as well, and be able to schedule those calls. We're not having to sort of plan and bring somebody along with you. I can see that that would definitely give you a bit more flexibility. But I guess that you would have also suffered the fate of having to respond to RFIs and RFPs within government.
Oh, yes, that was part of the process. I still had sales engineers to help me with whatever parts of the process where I actually needed somebody with more skill, at least while they were more skilled than me.
Yes.
To help me with the process. But I got pretty good with the software. I just loved it anyway. I always had a technical bent. And when I left Texas Instruments for a while, I was a software consultant for doing development for companies like OutSignal, Arizona Public Service, Intel, Motorola, with doing IEF development.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about Techies, where you're based, and what Techies does. It's sort of a high level.
Mm-hmm. We're based in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yep.
Techies is a software development company. We primarily do contract development for a lot of startups and some mid-size and some enterprise as well. Lots of different. The thing that's difficult to talk about with Techies is that because of my background, which is broadly varied,
yes,
in lots of different industries and also at different scales, because I also had a startup in the 90s that I sold in 2000. It was a inventory logistics software system, and I started that in parallel while I was doing the consulting work.
Yes.
So I have a broad background and also business analyst skills as well as technical skills, and so we take on a lot of varied types of projects. For example, one of my customers is a Broadway producer, and he's a well-known Broadway producer, choreographer. His name is Jeff Whiting, and he came to me many years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago now, because he wanted to build an app to help Broadway producers and choreographers stage plays.
Wow, that's specialized.
It's exactly. And so it was one of the hardest conversations I had with a customer initially, and it's actually a funny story, because I told him, I said, when he came to me with this idea, I said, this is a really cool app, and he wanted it to be iPad only, for originally.
Yes.
It's now gone on bigger and better. We've got a collaborative platform for developing these things, but he came to me with this idea of an iPad app. It was going to sell in the App Store for $200. And he had this very tiny little niche market, and this is not a cheap app to build.
Mm-hmm.
Very visual plays are pretty complicated things. So I said to him, "Are you sure you want to do this? I'm not sure that you'll be able to recoup your investment.
How big's the market, the target market there? I would have thought it would have been so limited.
Yeah. Oh, he said to me, "Well, I'm going to do this, and if you don't want to do it, then I'll find somebody who will." I said, "No, I'll do it. I just like to be honest with people what I think,
Yes.
because he had asked me, how do you think this will do?"
So what basis were you doing that venture? So was he just coming to you, you were giving
Yeah.
him a cost, you sharing on the profits?
No. It was just contract development.
Okay, right.
He's still a customer today, and that's how I work with 99% of my customers.
Yes.
I get asked all the time to partner, and like I said, 99% of the time I say no, because that's not my business. My business isn't to be in their software business. My business is to be really good at building software. But anyway, the funny part of that story was that turned out to be one of the successful customers I've had. He sold 50,000 copies of that iPad app.
You're joking.
No. Well,
50,000.
Yeah. I mean, it never.
Who was he selling? Who was he selling to?
High school, everybody involved in plays
Okay.
all around the world. Anybody staging plays.
Yes.
Private schools, grammar schools, high schools, college, universities.
Yes.
Students at universities, and virtually every play now for the last several years on Broadway is produced by Stage Right, the Emmys, the Tony Awards, to major.
What's the app called?
Stage Right Software.
Stage Right. Oh, yeah, I get that.
It's stagerightsoftware.com is the URL. It was one of the apps selected when Tim Cook announced the iPad Air and their big international launch. They did a montage that had like 15 iPad apps in it, how the iPads changed the world.
Yes.
And his app was one of them. Well, my app, it's his app.
His app, but you made it for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How much do they charge for it now? How much is Stage Right? Do you
know? Well, he now has a subscription-based service, and he's got a couple different prices.
Oh, okay.
Monthly subscription, web-based, collaborative that syncs with the iPad version.
Because
the iPad version is all free.
Yeah, I'm involved with the local amateur dramatics group, so I've been getting into that world over the last sort of 18 months. So I might go and have a look at that myself. Actually,
oh yeah,
I know what it's like. Yeah, it's
cool.
amazing how complex it gets to put on a performance.
Mm-hmm. Well, they when you're doing it professionally like that, they create something called a Stage Bible, which I had never heard of before I met Jeff, which is thousands of pages. That basically on the left side of the page, you see the stage with the props and the actors all in their position. On the right side is the score or the script for a 16 or 32 or 64 second period.
Right.
And then and there's a page for this every 30 to 60 seconds roughly for a play. So you get thousands of pages. So that's what Stage Right replaces that.
Wow. Yeah, I'm definitely going to go and have a look at that one. Very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about personal branding, because you mentioned that when I asked you just before this call, I said any particular hobbies. You said, well, personal branding, but does that count as a hobby? Because that's sort of connected with your business. It does sound quite business-like, but it is an interesting topic. How long have you been looking at that, and what is it that you've been doing? What are the things that you've been hoping to achieve?
Well, about 9 months ago, 10 months ago now, I had a big shift in my business. Split with a partner, and so who was managing the marketing and sales for the company, because I was involved in some other things. So I had to dive back in after many years into the marketing and sales for Techies and start to build it back up, and started networking and building, really working on personal reputation locally, because the things that I was doing prior to that wasn't the primary focus. And along the way, I bumped into some people that told me about this pull approach to personal branding that they've been doing.
Yes.
The idea, you're not really branding a business, but you're branding yourself personally, not just in an immediate network, but beyond that.
Yes.
And so I started to, and how they did it was they started marketing themselves to podcasts so that people like you would interview them, which is how we connected, because I have somebody that helps me with that and looks for
Stacey
opportunity.
Tash, who
Yeah,
contacted
Stacey
me
Tash.
a few weeks
Right.
ago. Yes, that's right.
And so when I started this, I thought, me, who am, how am I going to be interviewed by, the different people in technology and entrepreneurship and marketing, and it's turned out to be fantastic. It's done a number of things. Number one, aside from the fact that now I've got all these cool podcasts, interviews that I've had with different people on different topics to
Yes.
put on my website and to push out socially.
Yes.
It's also given me the opportunity to talk about myself and my business a lot, and makes it a lot easier now for me to talk about myself and my business, because I'm more practiced at it, which I
Yes.
didn't realize that would make a big difference. And then, of course, it just leads to other things. I ended up doing a keynote speech as a result of, a contact of a contact of a contact as a result of this personal branding effort. Ended up being a keynote speaker for a 4-day user group meeting that brought in 150 or so directors of public health from all around the country. I did that 4 weeks ago.
Wow. Yeah.
That was a blast. And I would never have been exposed to that opportunity if I hadn't started this process.
Yeah. Do you think that also that in talking about yourself and having to present yourself like this on a podcast, you probably go a bit deeper? As a result of that, have you seen things slightly differently? Do you see yourself in another way?
Very differently. As a result of doing this, it's that change or that metamorphosis is slowing down quite a bit now that I've done a number of these. But initially I was careful. I didn't want to get into the wrong podcast where I might be talking about the wrong thing. And it turns out that was just very foolish. That was okay. So Jeff Whiting, the Broadway producer, his company is called Open Jar Productions.
Okay.
And this is what I just said is a segue to this story. Just bear with me for just a second.
Sure.
And he named it Open Jar Productions because it's a metaphor from a book called The Secret Life of Bees, where the protagonist is this little girl. She's got bees living in the wall of her bedroom. She can't get anybody to believe her because she hears them at night, but during the day they're asleep apparently, or quiet, or they're out getting honey, and so nobody ever sees them. So she figures she's going to capture some of these bees. So she captures them into a jar so that she can prove she really has bees in her wall. Well, the metaphor is that she keeps them in the jar for a couple days. And she realizes that she's ruining the secret, bees have secret lives too. And she's, destroying their lives. So she lets them go and she takes the lid off the jar, and they won't fly out. And so she leaves the lid off the jar overnight. They still are in the jar. They fly right up to the top of the jar, right to the edge, and then they go down because they bumped into that lid enough times. Now they're not willing to take the risk that lid is still there. And I guess bees don't look up. So
there's a title for a book there, David. I love that. Bees don't look up. You've got it. I mean, there's a whole.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah, there's a whole book there, and it's about looking beyond your current horizons. Bees don't look up. I love it.
So finally, she turns the jar on her side, and then now the bees have a new perspective. They can fly out, but the idea is that we live our life most of the time with this idea that there's some lid that we can't go past, and the lid is nothing more than some made-up thing as a result of some experience or something we heard, and we just put that lid there. And so this personal branding process has been the constant realization that that anytime I pause, it's because I think there's a lid and there isn't one.
That's brilliant. I love that story. I think that's one of the best stories that I've heard on the Boss It podcast. I think that really is good. And There's a parable there probably for everybody, I think. Excellent. I'm going
I,
to remember that. I've written that one down. Open Jar
oh, yeah,
Productions. But Bees Don't
yeah,
Look Up, that's going to be the title of my next book, and I'm going to steal that from you. But
yeah. Well, thank Jeff for that,
yeah,
because
it's
I
great.
actually read that book, but never thought of that metaphor in any terms until Jeff did a TED talk
Yes.
uh, about 5 years ago or so, 4 or 5 years ago, talking about his software company,
Mm.
and he taught and he explained in the TED talk about OpenJar. I think he talked about it then. He also talked about this developer who told him that he wasn't going to be able to make enough money to make this successful, and don't ever listen to anybody that wants to squash your dreams. And I laugh about that with him now because, of course, he didn't mention my name. He's still my customer.
I think that there's an important lesson there, and it's something that I've seen work many times. Is in telling a story, you can convey a lot of information. We listen to stories. When you begin a story, we know it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we can remember that story. You could have
Well, I
thrown
like
out
that.
a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
facts and people would have forgotten it before the podcast has ended. That's how our minds work. But you put it in the context of a story and it stays with people. And I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, there's stories, and maybe I'll do it on another podcast, the Acres of Diamonds story, which I
Oh,
think,
I know. I have to hear that.
yeah, Acres of Diamonds, and it relates to the software industry. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that perhaps in the next podcast because I was thinking about that today. But it's something that I heard 20 years ago, maybe more. There are other stories that I think I've heard maybe even longer than that, but they stick with me. And that's so important is
Hmm.
for your personal branding, you want people to remember you. As a business, you want them to remember the business. You want them to understand it. And stories are a great way of doing that. So great illustration there.
They're really useful personally too.
Yeah.
It just like the lid on the jar, the bees in the jar
Yes.
story.
Yep.
When I was offered this podcast, the keynote speech,
Yes.
I came home and I'm thinking, I'm going to do this. What these are directors of public health. I'm a software entrepreneur, tech guy. Why am I doing this? And I was talking with my wife about it. She said, "Get the lid off, Dave. Get the lid off the jar."
Yeah.
And I thought, she's absolutely right. I'm sitting here struggling with the idea of doing this, and there's it only because I've got some fictitious notion of whether I'm worthy
Yes.
to do this. Anyway, and it went great. They loved the presentation. Was I worked really hard on it, but it went great. It was a perfect example of like that story ends up becoming a mantra for life. And I have a bunch of those. When I think about the most important things that I use to drive and improve, they're always tied to some story that's cyclical, that keeps coming back, that I have to remember, which it's easy when there are these types of stories. It's easy to remember them
It is. Yes.
and practice them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think if you can turn that into a visual, our
Hmm.
minds work very well with visuals. That
Right.
that again, you probably picture the jar or you picture the lid of the jar, and that stays with you. So it's yeah, very interesting. I wanted
Hmm.
to.
Yeah, and I did.
Sorry.
And I did that for the presentation. I had a slide that I animated just a little bit with bees in a jar. Oh, two big giant bees. They were herding bees
Yes.
in a jar with sad looking faces, and and then the lid comes off the jar, and then she turns it on her side. I talked about that in the presentation too. It was I used that metaphor in a different way for this group, but it really sunk in.
Yeah. No, that's great. Um, I wanted to touch on another topic before we finish, which was something that, I'm hearing a lot about. It is going to have an impact. It already has an impact. Is around the idea of no code, low code. And when we spoke about it, we sort of used the terms a little bit interchangeably, which is framework and platform. So tell me a little bit about that. What's been your experience with that, and talk about framework and platform?
Okay. And I'm also curious. You said you're hearing a lot about that yourself.
Yes, I think that
What
this
What are you hearing?
is from other software developers. I think some that are seeing this is actually in two respects. It's from the development companies, but then there are the potential users that are out there that are understanding the impact of this. It's been spoken about, I think, for quite some time. You know, when people were talking about software as a solution and thinking about the time that it takes to create that solution, and that links back to the, the speed of business, and you need to be much, much faster. They were talking about code that writes codes or tools that writes codes that enables you
Mhm.
to do this much more quickly. Sometimes it was in a modular form. But then we're talking about putting the power of creating the solution more in the hands of the people to understand the solution. So for me, I see a difference between tool and craft, and I think that the software industry, what is it, 30 years old? It's
Mhm.
pretty immature, really, and
Right.
there's been a big focus upon the tool, about the actual art of developing software. And actually, we know within the industry that it's like any other tool. You can have great software, you can have average software, but if you put it in the hands of the right person, and part of being able to apply the tool effectively is understanding that business. And I think that there are issues sometimes when you get outside developers coming into a business that they don't know, and even an industry they don't know, is that the
Mhm.
first part got to educate themselves. And will they ever know it as well as the people that are perhaps working there for 10, 15, 20 years? So
Right.
if there's a way to make that more seamless so that you can put the tool in the hands of the people that really understand that they can
Mhm.
develop their own tool, you get the craft as well. And I
Yeah.
think software developers are seeing that as a potential threat. And then I'm seeing other software developers are saying, well, actually, that's where we're going to focus, and that won't be a threat. That will be just an expansive explosion of opportunity for us.
Mhm. Well, there's so much to unpack in what you just said.
Probably too much,
The
actually. Too much.
right. No,
Sorry
I
about that.
mean it was you're so right on so many level on so many fronts. One thing that you mentioned was um, uh, putting the people that understand the business closer to the actual development of the systems
Mm,
because they can, which you need both, right?
yes.
Because they don't have any experience. People that understand the business don't have experience with user ability, with user experience, and with why you might architect something a certain way because of potential performance, potential flexibility, things like that. They have no experience with that. Yeah, on the other hand, those are the people that understand what the system needs to do to support what the business is trying to accomplish because they're much closer to the business than they are the systems, the business analysts. So the other thing you said that in particular I wanted to focus on was the whole threat idea
Yes.
because there are software developers out there that are still focused on COBOL. COBOL has made a resurgence because of some old systems that need to be maintained, and there's so few COBOL programmers out there that now they're being paid quite well under contract. They're getting really pretty surprisingly high rates for just doing COBOL code maintenance. So a friend of mine for 30 years, who's a COBOL programmer, has never gone beyond COBOL other than he was an IEF, Texas Instruments platform developer too.
Right.
He's still been doing COBOL that entire time, mostly for government systems that are still in COBOL, but some enterprise systems. And he's been working full time the whole time. So somebody like that will always feel threatened by new technology because they don't want to expand. They're not curious about how technology has changed, and they don't want to lose their edge in terms of their expertise
Maybe they don't
in
want to
something that,
take the
yeah.
lid off the jar.
Oh, yeah, there's no question. This is all, they basically have many lids they have to just be unscrewing. If they're still doing COBOL, they're unscrewing lids for weeks on end.
Yeah, I mean, I
You know?
wouldn't. I'm not going to criticize people that do that, and I think that there are people that
Oh, I don't.
that have worked for years and years in the same company, sometimes doing the same job, and they're very happy doing that, and I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But for me,
Uh,
to be
Can I?
happy is
Yeah.
learning. That's one of the
Let
sort of the
me.
key
Let me.
things.
I want to repeat what I just said. I didn't mean
No,
it
no,
as a
no, and I
criticism.
wasn't suggesting you were. I think, but it
Yeah.
can be seen as a criticism, and I don't think that the way that you were phrasing it, you were meaning to be critical of him. You were just stating it as fact.
Yeah.
That's what he's done. That's how I
It's a
listen to it anyway.
it's a personality type, right? Some people
Mm,
are. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of
yes.
needs, some people are very dependent on those first two layers
Mm,
of Maslow's hierarchy, which talks, the first layer, we're all like dependent. That's about eating, sleeping,
Yes.
right, and breathing.
Yeah.
But the second layer is all about risk and fear.
Yes.
And some people are just hypersensitive to that second layer, and so anything that comes along that is going to disrupt what they do is going to be extremely uncomfortable. I totally recognize that. And so they'd rather be really good at one thing and and have job security and career security, because nobody's better than them at this thing that maybe a lot of people don't want to do, but they like doing it because it feels good,
Yes.
right? That's why we all do what we do, right? Because it feels good.
Yes.
So I understand that. So and I love having people that I work with who are like that, because I can trust them. They are going to deliver and be committed, because that is what feels good to them.
Yes. I
Right?
mean, I think that people can get. I think there's 5 different levels of. I remember the top one was self-actualization, love and belonging, esteem. I can't remember which order it was in, but I think
Right.
that people can get those needs fulfilled in different ways as well.
And some people just need less of the higher level stuff
Yes.
than the lower level stuff, and other people need abundance of the higher level stuff,
Yes.
and are willing and can. And as long as their life is threatened at that moment, they are willing to take all kinds of risks.
I've known.
And that's not
I,
right. That's not the person I want necessarily working for me. But a lot of entrepreneurs are like that, right?
Yes. I've known people that outside their work environment, they've got a interest, a pursuit, or a hobby that is almost dominating. I was a triathlete for a number of years, and I trained with people. That was the thing that they really focused on, and they didn't want in their business life any work that would encroach on that. That was really important.
Right.
A job where they can go in and they can work maybe shorter hours and they could have flexible time. It didn't challenge them, was great, because they could be challenged. They could get their self-actualization in their triathlon.
That describes a very old friend of mine, it describes him perfectly. He's a triathlete, he's in his late 50s now.
Yep.
He's been a triathlete since he was in his early 40s, and running marathons and doing full, Ironman triathlons. For the last 10, 12 years, he's been doing the triathlons, and he does several a year. I don't know how many. And he also is an attorney, and he works as for the state, one of the states in the U.S., as an attorney for the state, and he's very happy with his job. It's a big demand on him, and he trains 3-4 hours every single day.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want, and he also does the Bike Across America race every year. He's part of a team. He's been doing that for now almost a decade. So this is what his life is all about. And
I understand that, and
good luck.
I feel exactly the same. And I went through a period where I used to train twice a day, 6 days a week, and I got a lot of satisfaction from that. But I sort of passed through that, and I thought, actually, I want to do more in the sort of the business world now.
Yeah, that has to be your ambition, as opposed to business being your ambition. If you're going to do that level of commitment, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've distracted you, taking you away from from talking about
The
no
low
code,
code.
low code. Yeah,
Right, no code.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so that the other thing to unpack there is the idea of simplifying and abstracting the code from machine code to assembler to third level languages to fourth level languages, and each one encapsulating and packaging more functionality with fewer lines of code. But those are still very technical developer endeavors, which is what you were saying. When you take the next step, which is a model-driven environment, then you've found a way to wrap functionality into these little bits that can then be basically dragged and dropped onto a canvas as shells of a function. And if you make the thing that makes these environments work now is you make these functions small enough in the environments. And then a lot of the problems that the early model-driven development environments had go away. And you just build the scaffolding around the system so that each of these tiny little pieces of work can live independently as its own microservice or as its own IoT service inside an IoT device, or it can be clustered with other pieces of work that then live independently somewhere, either very small, or they can be then clustered together into big complex functions that may all live together. They may live across technology and are dependent upon each other, but work seamlessly regardless of where you deploy it. So there's a lot of things that have to scaffold all this together for this to work really well, because the deployment, the queuing, the scalability, the message handling, the expression of APIs so that it's easy to plug into these things, either with other things that you're building using the same platform or other third-party tools that are not part of the platform. But the thing that makes them powerful is you're using business analysts to define all this instead of developers. You still want developers. You never want to have any kind of sophisticated system without a good tech team involved, but you don't need nearly as many. And a business analyst takes a whole layer of the translation of requirements out of the process. And while you're building the system, you're documenting it at the same time. And it's just incredibly powerful. Of course, the goal of all this, one, you build systems much faster that actually meet the target requirements for whether your own requirements or the client's requirements, whoever the stakeholders are. And number two, you can make changes to the system and manage versions of this really easy. And three, you have endless flexibility in terms of DevOps, deployment, continuous integration. These are the reasons that somebody might pursue going this low-code, no-code direction. And to the degree that the platform that the person's using accomplishes those things, it can completely transform the development environment, the life cycle, the QA process, all of it.
And I think that I hear and I sense that there is parts of the software industry that they see this as a challenge, as a risk, that as this gains in popularity. But actually, I don't think it should be. I think it will be, because it's where people are not willing to adapt. Because essentially what we're talking about is an immature industry that, I'll only whisper this, is between us software guys. The solutions that we've created in the past, user satisfaction, I think could be way higher. I think the actual benefits that could be brought, I think could be way higher. But I'm not going to tell anyone that. And I think here is a way that solutions could be developed much, much faster with greater input and have better implementation and results. And that's not a
And better
challenge,
quality.
much better quality.
Yeah.
And that's not a challenge. That's an opportunity, but it's an opportunity only if you can adapt. And there is a real split in the industry, and I see that in so many different areas, is that there are the software thinkers, the software companies, and the software people that are willing to adapt to this changing environment, and there are others that want to hang on to what they know because that's what's worked. And I'm not
From
a
your
risk taker.
perspective, what are the characteristics of the ones that want to adapt versus those that don't?
Curiosity and a
Yeah.
need for learning. I'm curious. I want to learn more. Not to say I'm now 40, 50, 60, or even 70. I've stopped learning. You learn when you're a youngster, and then you just carry it out. That world doesn't exist anymore. We were talking about, we spoke briefly about books, and one of my criticisms is when you're writing books about the software industry, bearing in mind I've written one, is the time you've published it, it's out of date.
Right.
It's moved on. And I think that software entrepreneurs, I don't want to talk in sort of sweeping statements here, but there are certain characteristics that you see. They're people that are curious and they want to innovate and create. And that's why they often come to me and saying, can you sell my business? Because they've taken it to a certain level, they've created value. To take that business on further takes a different role. It's more about, this is what we do. We're now going to manage it, and it's about managing the people and doing more of that. They want to go out and innovate again. They want to go and do something different. They want that creativity, and they want to be learning as well, and they're prepared to learn. And if you're not, I think then you start to struggle.
So I have this hiring philosophy. Um, uh, I really kind of honed this philosophy when I started working with offshore, and that is I won't hire somebody that I don't feel is smarter than I am. And the people that work for me, if they're hiring, that's my first rule, is they have to be smarter than them. They have to only recruit people that they feel are going to free them up because they can add more value. They can be better at whatever it is they're being hired for. They can learn it faster. And so it's those people in my mind that have that mindset that are what you just said. It's this natural curiosity and a driven curiosity. And
Absolutely.
those are usually, I don't know if they're smarter people necessarily, but they're going to learn more and become better at it because they just don't settle for, okay, this is how you do it.
No,
that's how you do it.
Yeah.
I can see that why you did it that way, but if I think about it, I could probably think of a better way.
Yes. Also, be willing to give away the ideas or your beliefs of the past, because somebody's brought something to you. Without getting political, in the UK, we've got a new Prime Minister here, and my view of Boris Johnson, because of
just in the last few days,
because of the snippets that I'd been presented to me, bearing in mind these are snippets of information that is filtered to me by the media mostly. I've never met him face to face. I didn't have a particularly positive view of him. I'd seen clips where he'd performed very badly on TV. He seemed to be trying to twist and the truth. But I did listen to a couple of his speeches recently because I wanted to try and get a better feel for him. And actually, I thought, there's some things there I'm quite impressed with. He sounded a little bit like Winston Churchill, which was probably one of our greatest leaders that we had here. And he had some very good ideas. And very quickly, by listening to the long form instead of snippets, my perception of him changed. And I think I'd like to think that I'm always willing to change my thinking. And I think you need that. You need to have that flexibility to say, this is what I believed in the past, but actually the evidence shows me I can let that go, and I can now believe this. It will serve.
So how do we bottle that open-mindedness? Because
yes, I don't know. Well, I suppose you have to say we live in a world that moves so quickly. You can't do anything different and really hope to be successful or lead a successful life. I never thought that I would be doing podcasts. If I go look back 5 years, I'd say, why would I be doing that? Crazy. And I did it
And
tentatively, but
yeah.
it's taken momentum.
Mhm. And I would venture to say that anybody listening to any of your podcast probably is already embodied that idea that they have to be open-minded, or they wouldn't be reaching out and listening, trying to learn
That's
something
true,
new.
yes. And I think that's good as well, because I think somebody who's trying to engage, with me or my company, before they've actually met me, that there's a selection going on. You get a feel, this is just me, I'm just being me. I will say things that are probably not correct, strictly speaking, on the podcast. But you know what to expect, and it will turn some people away, but I think it will attract other people to say, I get that. That makes sense to me, and I'll go forward. I'm just looking at the time. Do you know how long we've been talking for?
No, how long?
50 minutes. We were,
Oh my.
we were going to do.
It's amazing how quick it goes when you get in a conversation like
It
this.
is. It's amazing, but that's a really good sign, David. So I don't know how many podcasts you've done, but you've done a good job today. There's a couple of points there that I've highlighted that I think you made some really valid points, and I think that this will be an interesting podcast for many people out there. We will be sending this out. This goes out to, we've got quite a big database. We actually send this out to people. There's about 25,000 software entrepreneurs that this goes out to, plus put it on to Apple, and it goes out onto a number of other platforms. So you never know ultimately how many listen to it, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are interested in what you had to say. And for that, I thank you. So thank you for making an interesting podcast. And
well, thank you for having me and being such a conversationalist instead of an interviewer.
yes, thank you very much. I take that as a compliment. It really is.
Yeah.
This is the Boss It podcast. It's for software entrepreneurs. You've been listening to David Hirschfield. My name is Mark Edwards. If you enjoyed it, then please share this with other people, talk to people, spread it around, because I'd love to be able to talk to more people. And I want to leave you with a thought today. My thought for today is the spoken word now more powerful than the written word? I'd love to hear from you on that one. And thank you for listening.